How to build rotational power for boxing. Rotational power does have a huge transfer towards punching power. A lot of boxers, athletes, and coaches all can recognize the benefits. That's why they look to try and do rotational med ball throws, rotational med ball slams. But the biggest mistake is that athletes and coaches look to try and do this first because this has the biggest transfer towards the punch and looks more like explosive performance. However, due to mobility issues and strength issues, boxers should work on the foundations first before moving on to these powerful and explosive exercises. The foundations are mobility, stability, and strength. So we'll look at mobility first. So we're looking at improving the mobility of the thoracic region of the spine, which is your upper back. A lot of boxers get tight in here because they're tight in their shoulders, and it's very anterior dominant sport. So they get tight in the thoracic spine, which will affect their thoracic rotation, which means that they'll start compensating through that rotation through either side bending or kind of extension of the spine. And this makes the back muscles quite tight, in particular the QL muscle, the quadratus lumborum, and this affects rotational performance. So with this, we look to try and focus on improving that thoracic rotation and also upper body and lower body separation, which is keeping the legs stable whilst improving that upper body rotation. We look to also improve rotational stability. This is anti-rotation. So we're resisting rotation. Basically, we're performing the core movements that require very little or no rotation of the spine. This is why we're doing pull-off presses, isometric pull-off presses, and a range of different rotational exercises that are keeping that resistance fixed all the way through. This is really important to transfer towards rotational performance because we need that stiffness to control the eccentric loading going through the stretch shortening cycle when we're performing powerful rotational movements. And then before we move on to rotational power, we transfer that stability into strength, where we're working rotational strength through a range of motion. This is still anti-rotation because we're still controlling that rotation, but we're going through a range of motion. And we're particularly concentrating on the eccentric portion of this because, like I said, the eccentric is important to control them forces during the stretch shortening cycle to then reproduce force into powerful rotational performance. And this should give you the right foundations in terms of strength and stability, but also the mobility in there to make sure that you've got the right activation patterns to get the most out of your rotational power exercises. Then when you're doing your rotational power exercises, you need to make sure that you're going towards the 4 different elements that we're wanting to do. Wanting to overload the eccentric. So making sure that we're providing enough force going into that med ball throw to overload that eccentric to then reproduce power through that stretch shortening cycle. We need to make sure that we're pivoting and not leaning. A key mistake that we see boxers do when they're looking to try and produce force, they're leaning into that movement. So this means that they're not using that rotational function, they're more kind of using that QL and also using the body weight as momentum to generate that power. Then also you're needing to make sure that you're doing upper body and lower body separation. So making sure you're keeping them legs fixed, creating that coil effect through the trunk. So the more that the legs move, the less kind of strain that you have on the oblique muscles and your trunk muscles. And then we're moving away from that adaptation that we're wanting to create. If you're wanting to move your hips into the movement, make sure that you're pivoting your hips all the way through and we're not having them hips in no man's land. Then the 4th one is making sure that you're not underloading the movement, not making sure that you're doing it light on 3 kilos or 2 kilo medicine balls. Make sure that you're getting the right loading for your athletes. So with lighter fighters, you would be going around about 3 or 5 kilos. For heavier fighters, I class that as light middleweight and above. You're working towards around about 5 or 7 kilos on your rotational med ball work.